Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Heilman and Haver. We are glad to be joined today by Russ Rayburn, a accomplished and award-winning producer, editor, writer, and director of photography for feature films, documentaries, hundreds of corporate adventure, travel, sports, and news programs. He's a specialist in the use of 35 and 16 millimeter film and 4K and HD digital videography. And he's also, this is very cool, a patent holding inventor. We've got to ask you about this, Russ, of professional film and television products and accessories. We need to find out what those are here in a little while.
Okay. Okay.
Russ holds a degree in radio and television from Southern Illinois University and worked as a freelance director and cameraman in Colorado and California for 30 plus years on documentaries, sports, and corporate and medical projects, network news for 60 Minutes, NBC, ABC, CNN, all the acronym networks you can name, Dateline, shows like Perry Mason, Diagnosis Murder, Ironsides, Entertainment Tonight. Russ and his company, Winding Road Films HD, have contributed to shows like Drive Chicago, the Ferrari Challenge on the Speed Channel, and the 5 seasons and 56 episodes of the HD series Ride to Adventure, where he served as a director of photography.
That's also where he met actor and director in 2008, and our guest of episode 27, Perry King. And that led Russ to joining Perry's independent feature film project, The Divide, which you remember us chatting with Perry about. Boy, it's been several months back now, but go back and check out episode 27. The resulting film, shot on Perry's California ranch in stunning, I gotta say, stunning 4K black and white. It garnered a ton of awards at numerous film festivals around the U.S. and the world, including, for Russ, our guest today, the Best Cinematography Award in 2018 at the London Independent Film Awards. Russ joins us from his home in the Chicago area. Russ, thanks so much for being with us.
No, you're welcome. Glad to be here.
So tell us, you've done literally everything behind the camera. When did you first become interested in film and television? Were you just born with a camera in your hand?
No, I wasn't born with the camera in my hand, and I didn't have anything to do with cameras until I got to college.
Okay.
And our paths all go wherever they go. Just by accident and whatever. I transferred into Southern Illinois University from University of Illinois, and I was very lucky because the rules back then were that if you were a transfer student, you didn't have to follow the rules of take freshman classes in the freshman year, sophomore classes sophomore year. So I could take my major when I got there and then take all the required stuff I didn't want to take my last year.
Nice.
And so that worked out really well. But it's in high school, I did this. I got talked from a speech class into doing this radio announcing state contest, And so I thought my goal was to be an announcer, radio announcer. And so I decided to take that. And then as one of my electives in the first quarter that I was there was basics of cinematography. And ended up with an excellent teacher, John Mercer. And he taught me really the basics. And from the first, and it was the first time I'd ever shot anything on film, still or motion. And he felt I had a knack for it, and he commented about my composition and framing, and I thought, my what? And so I must have, I had some natural eye for it. It's one of my few talents, but I have an eye for that. And I hear people talking about the rule of thirds and all this stuff. I think it's just nonsense. It's like you got to feel what you're looking at, pay attention to what you're looking at, and see what it's supposed to mean to you and to the audience. And that's the way I always approached it. And from that, right away, I got a job with the SIU Broadcasting Service, which that was before PBS, but we were an educational station. And so instead of flipping burgers at the local McDonald's or something, my college job was shooting for a documentary series and for a weekly news magazine show. So when I finished college, I actually had a reel, 16 millimeter reel that I could show somebody, and a lot of experience. And so it was a good, SIU was a good experience for me. I hit it just right, and I landed a job within a week after I finished my classes. And I have to thank Harlan Mendenhall in the broadcasting department for the contact that got me my first job, and that's why I'm where I am today.
Well, the rest is history.
It's all important. Yeah, the rest is history, and it was just by chance. I just happened to go into the TV station where he gave me a reference And I was told that, sorry, kid, we haven't had an opening here in 5 years. And so the guy who was my contact thought, oh, well, poor kid, he drove all the way out to Colorado for this job and didn't materialize. And he took me to lunch. When I got back, I had forgotten my 16 millimeter reel up on his desk. I thought, oh, I got to go get my reel. I was upset and I forgot that I left it there. So as I'm going up the stairs, I see the news director. He says, you got a minute? Had a job like that. He says, how soon can you start?
Wow.
And I was there 7 years and then went freelance after that.
Opportunity meets preparation.
There you go.
Yeah, and that chance led to an over 30 plus year career in all the genres. We love to have people on our show that have worked in television and movies and different genres, because we can get kind of a comparison of what it's like to work in each of them, what the differences are. So, I mean, from your perspective, from commercials and TV and film, what are the differences in how you approach a project in those genres?
Well, it's like every subject is different. Let me back up a little bit. So when I was trained by John Mercer in Harlan Mendenhall in school, I considered myself trained to be a cinematographer. So when I got my first job in TV news as a TV news cameraman, I always thought of myself as a cinematographer first and a news guy second, where I think a lot of the people that I worked with, it was just the opposite. They were news people who learned how to use a camera, and I was a cinematographer who had the opportunity to shoot news. And it's a great training ground, and a lot of well-known DPs, cinematographers, started out working in news, documentary, corporate, all that. Not everybody came up through the studio system of being a second assistant, first assistant, AC, and to operator and DP eventually. So everybody gets there a different way, and you just have to go with what's in front of you. You just take the opportunity as it's there and learn all you can as you go.
Do you have a favorite of the genres over the years that you prefer to work on?
Not really. I liked all of them. And what I really loved about the job, especially TV news and documentary and the corporate world and everything, is I got to work with so many different people in so many different locations. I mean, I've been to all 50 states. I've worked in 49 of them, and been to 28 or so foreign countries. And it's if you go to, say, South Africa, for instance, and you're working there, or you go to wherever, it doesn't matter. You're not a tourist. You're actually working there, and it's a different experience. But I've worked with 3 different presidents, and I've also, worked with lepers in the Amazon. So
Wow.
It goes everywhere. So sometimes you're hanging around with very rich people, sometimes very poor people, sometimes in the middle, people that work for a living, people who don't work for a living. It's all stripes. It's all types, and you get to see so much of the country. And I remember when a reporter friend of mine that I worked with, Leo McGuire, when he retired about 20 or so years ago, at his retirement party, he said a line I'll never forget. He says, "I've gotten to go to places where you can't buy a ticket." It's really true. You're behind the scenes on a lot of stuff, and you see things differently than almost anybody else that's in any other kind of profession. So you get to see the good, the bad, the ugly, the different, indifferent. You get to see everything, and even if you go to some place that's terrible, it's like, well, it's an experience, but I never have to come back here again. Or
Right.
you go to someplace nice, you say, oh, okay, I've been to a nice place, and all on somebody else's dime, And that's the other thing. You get used to traveling and other people are paying all your expenses. It's like, then later you go, oh, you mean I have to pay for all this myself? I wasn't used to that. It's like, I remember a job one time we were covering this legal case in Colorado. It's about a young Swiss national boy. He was about 10 or so. And he was accused of a crime, and he was, they said the rumor was he was going to be released that day. And the rumor was the Swiss consulate was going to pick him up, take him right to the airport, and take him back home to Switzerland. And they said, when you come here tomorrow, bring your passport. Okay. And a couple of extra batteries, a couple of extra tapes. Okay. So I showed up that morning with a backpack with extra tapes, my passport, extra tapes, extra batteries, and they released him, and we went right to the airport. Went up to the counter. The guy got his American Express card. We need 2 tickets to Zurich. we're
Wow.
gone. And it was like that. It was just like, okay, I'm not going home tonight. I'm going to Zurich.
Wow,
Well,
to be
yeah.
flexible.
It's the kind of experience, and so that was the fun of it. And then also, like for 2 years, I was the official photographer, videographer. I was film back then, cinematographer for the Denver Nuggets, and they're in the NBA, and 1 year when they're in the playoffs. And so, I had one of those passes that I could go anywhere, go to the locker room anytime I wanted, the front office, anywhere on in the arena, riding on the team buses and all that stuff, which, let's face it, most people never get anything like that. So you see the good and the bad of everything. So
Well, you mentioned film. So obviously one of the things you've seen in your career is the transition from film to digital. And in still photography, they always said, even back in the film days, film is cheap, shoot everything. And it's more so that way with digital. And I assume it's the same way with digital, film, photography, where you're making motion pictures that you can film more cheaply.
Well, now the problem is, it's like when it's digital and now it's cards, was tape, and it's relatively cheap, and you would just overshoot and overshoot and overshoot, and then you're just loading up the editor with all kinds of extra work. But my experience in working in TV news, especially in the early 70s, we were on some tight budgets, and every week they would post from the processor operator. They would get how much footage was your name was on it that they processed, and then they would say how many stories you did and how many feet of film were used in the stories. Then they put your shooting ratio up on the board on the door to the wire room, and so there's this contest of and this news director was, well, if you had the highest or the worst shooting ratio that week, you really got called on the carpet. And so you learned how to be efficient. I mean, you really had to learn when you went to a press conference. You had to develop this sense of when somebody's about to say something important, when to roll, because you don't want to upcut it, you don't want to be late, but you can't just shoot everything. Now you go in there, you just let it roll, and it's no trick to it. You just let it roll. You go in a head and shoulder shot and let it roll. Back then, it's almost like you had to know, but then again, a lot of the politicians, especially back then, politicians, they knew how to signal you that they were about to say something they wanted recorded. They kind of preface it with a short sentence and then kind of repeat it. And then you go, roll on this one. And then you do it. But you learn a shooting ratio and you learn to be more efficient. And you don't waste much. And I remember this was the days of when video was still, or just beginning to happen. We had the Betacam cameras and everything. And I got this job to go to the Amazon to shoot for the religious order fundraising film. And so I took my 16 millimeter camera. And when we got to Manaus, as we're loading the bags, the one producer / priest said to me, "Oh, how much film did you bring?" I said, 35 rolls. He says, "How long is a roll?" I said, 11 minutes. And he just turned white. He said, "Where are we going to get more film when we're done there?" I said, "Don't worry. I got plenty." I came back with 2 unshot rolls. So it was like, you knew, because you couldn't just, and it was the cost and it was processing, but it was also how much are you going to carry and how much are you going to have to try to protect and keep out of the heat and humidity as much as possible in that situation. So you learn to be very efficient, and that's helped me a lot, I think.
Well, meeting interesting people is something that we enjoy having this show. We get to talk to so many interesting folks from so many different walks of life in show business, yourself included. Another, obviously, was Perry King, a guy who's been around for quite a while as both an actor, director, TV, film. He had tons of stories back on episode 27 of all the folks that he met from the previous generation of showbiz folks. We alluded to it in your bio, but tell us what project you guys were working on when you met, how that all happened, and how you got involved with The Divide.
Well, for 5 years, I did half-hour episodes on a national cable channel. It was a travel adventure show, A Ride to Adventure. And in 2008, in May, I was in Death Valley, and the company was one of our sponsors, put together this shoot, and they brought Perry and some representatives of 3 motorcycle manufacturers, and we were doing motorcycle riding through Death Valley. And so I filmed that show, and our host got sick after the first day, so we didn't have him to do the on-camera stuff. So I said, Perry, could you do some of the bridges and things for me here? Because can you interview some of the other guys, and can you do the throws to commercial and whatnot? And he did, and it worked out fine. And when we were done with the show, I sent him a copy of the show, and he got back to me, and we talked for a while. He really liked the show. And then the very next year, I had a client out of Santa Cruz called Zero Motorcycles. It was one of the first battery-powered motorcycles. And so we put together a shoot in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado, doing a trip over Black Bear Pass and Imogene Pass with the Zero Motorcycles. And that was a job away from, similar, but a job away from the Ride to Adventure series. And then in 2014, he called me one day. I remember I was stuck in a blizzard, and I answered my phone, and it was Perry, and he told me about his film. And he said, "Would you like to be involved?" I said, "Sure." And so within about 2 months, I went out to California, and I did a scout on his land. And he had been working with writer Janet Brown for a year or so before that. And so we started planning on doing the movie. And so the next year, we filmed the movie in the middle of one of the hottest summers, one of the the worst drought in California history at that time. Almost every day we were there. I was there for 4 weeks of pre-pro and 5 weeks of principal, and I don't think it was ever under 100 degrees on any of the days.
Wow.
And the dust and the heat, I mean, it really made it tough to work, especially for the AC who was having to change lenses, whatnot, and try to keep things clean. It was tough.
Wow, I bet.
It turned out to be a great experience. It was my opportunity to shoot a feature film. I always thought I could. And that's what I always wanted to do, and I got to do it. And I'll tell you, when I wrote Perry a couple of weeks ago about, can I have permission to use frames in this podcast? He said, "Oh yeah, of course you can." And then he wrote me. He said, he told me he said, "Be free to say whatever you want to say." And I said, "Okay." And he said this on your podcast, so I'm not saying anything out of school, but he said that. I just read it before I came on, and I want to make sure I had it right the way he said it. He said, in the beginning of the film, he was checking me all the time, make sure I had this framed the way he wanted it and everything. He said after a day or so, he said, this guy knows how to do it better than I do, so I'm just going to let him do it. So it was a great opportunity because I was basically calling all the shots on the visuals. And he, as a director-actor, he was working with the talent. And that's tough. I mean, I'm sure you've interviewed people before who've had to do that, and that's tough to wear both hats. So basically, he just turned all of that over to me, but I was well prepared for that because a couple things. We didn't do a storyboard. And we
Remember that, yeah.
really couldn't afford it, and I didn't need it because from years of experience, the kind of work I did, I learned how to approach something and just visualize what's going to happen and just plot it out in my head and then do it. And so that worked. And the other thing is we didn't do Video Village. And I'm really happy about that because the only other person other than the AC that would, and the DIT later, but the only person on location that would see what we were doing was just occasionally, if Perry had time, he might come over and ask for a replay of one shot, but we didn't allow anybody else to see it. And that saved us a lot of time. And I would do that again. I just think, and especially from his explanation of what he thought was wrong with Video Village is everybody stands around, everybody's got an opinion. And then, too many cooks spoil the broth. And it's just like, so we just did it. But it was really fun to have the leeway on a feature film as the DP to say, just go in there. What I would do is, so I was extremely familiar. I'd work with Perry and Jana. We were kind of the de facto producers in the beginning of the film, just the three of us working together. And so the writer, obviously, and Perry, but then I understood the script at a very good level. And so when we would start a scene or we would get to the location, Perry and I would have the actors come together. I'd decide where I'm shooting it. And then I would have the actors, here's your mark, here's your mark. Okay, run the scene. Okay, I'll go over here a little bit, get running again. Go over here a little bit, run it again. Okay, good. ready to go. And then after that, it was, pretty standard stuff. Your master, and then whatever coverage you decided to do. But it really worked for me because my style on this was to do very little camera movement. I wanted it very traditional. And what I like to do is to fill the frame and have things move into the frame, join in the frame. And there's one scene, I did not get this still, well, it was a motion shot, it would be hard to do, where there's this reveal where there's the barn at night and somebody comes in and, here's my hand, breaks the frame right here, just as Perry breaks the frame right here, and then they meet in the middle and he stops them from doing something. So it took a bit of coordination, but it was like lockdown frame, and and it's the strangest thing when I don't forget how many takes it took to get it, but once they both broke the frame edge at exactly the same time, it did something for your attention, and then you're just drawn into it. So to me, it's always been a case of the composition is everything. The framing is how you detail the composition, but the composition and that mise en scène, what you pack into that frame, that proscenium arch of the movie, that's the all important thing. And I like to play that as much as I can. Matter of fact, when we were doing our premiere, the main Brian, who played Luke, the ranch hand, came up to me. He said, "You used every inch of that frame." I said, "Yeah, that was." And there was another one too. I had no good way of doing this as a still with you guys, but there's one where Perry, as Sam, the character, is going into the barn, and there's a fence, and once again, he just gets into the barn. Just as he opens the door, you see Brian said, "Just break the frame." He's spying on him. Mm-hmm. And so it was, once again, it's one of those, and it just, that kind of thing just works for me. And matter of fact, I had some people on the group, "Why aren't you doing a movie? Or why don't you, we got a dolly. Why don't you do a dolly movie?" I don't want a dolly. I don't need a dolly movie. I'm breaking it up into the component parts. And then when you put it together, it works even better. And you lessen, you don't lessen the complexity of it because you got to get the timing just right. But that's the way I like to work it. And that's the way it worked on this movie.
I remember a book I read by David Mamet talking about directing film, and he talks about how the very basic building block of any film is the cuts.
Yeah, and it's like, to me, it was, when I was putting this together principally in the beginning, the timing is determined by the actors. Now we can play with the timing a little bit, cut, whatever. But the actors, if they're in the character, if they're in the story, they're determining your timing for you almost all the time. And that's what is more organic to making it work, as far as I'm concerned. But I know a lot of people are not going to agree with that, but that's what I believe. Because I would look at, here's the master, and it would be, when it's like, when it's time to cut, and you don't want to overcut, when it's time to cut. And I got another shot I want to talk about a little bit later, but when it's time to cut, when it's time to cut, you feel it. And then when you cut back, and then you know it. And, I had never worked on that level with actors before this, and it really made me appreciate what they do. And we had, there's a scene near the end of the movie where the daughter and Sam, the character, Perry's character, are talking, and it's no spoiler alert, but he has the early stages of dementia, and she can't figure out, this is 40 or almost 50 years ago, and they didn't even call it that back then. And so she's trying to figure out, why is he asking questions over and over again? Why is he so confused at times? And other times he's very lucid. And she keeps asking him this. So what happens when we shot that, and it was a night for night, we were shooting late into the night, like 2, 3 in the morning or something. And after we did our master, I did Sarah's close-ups. And then the first AD came in and said, "Cal Fire had just called. There's range fire, forest fires in the area. Smoke danger is very high. We have to shut down." So it was like, okay, because there were fires. We were very concerned that we were going to get shut down by a fire, and we did for a while. So what happened was we just locked everything down, turned everything off, and left. And we couldn't come back for 2 days. Because when we walked out of that house, that ranch house that night, you couldn't see the first production trailer, which was just, 40 feet away. So
Wow.
it was very dangerous conditions. But when we came back, we'd already shot that. So then we shot Perry's close-ups. And then when you put it all together, it's like you have no idea that when Perry says this, Sarah says this, 48 hours apart.
Right.
So when we put it together, it's like, and that's how good they were as actors, that they were consistent, very consistent. Perry said, so I don't know if he said this on your show, but he said something that really stuck with me one time. And I forget what famous actor told him this, but anyway, he said, acting is simple, but it's not easy. And what he meant by that was an actor needs to convince you that what he's saying and doing, he's doing for the first time.
Right.
And that's not easy. That's why I say it's simple, but it's not easy. So
yeah, and simplicity, I think sometimes is a bit, I don't want to say confusing, but it's distracting because you think it's something. It's nothing simple about making a film, for sure. But then when you break things down, one of the things that jumps out at you, speaking of simplicity, is the film shot in black and white, which you don't see traditionally these days unless it's done purposely, like in movies like Schindler's List, The Artist, Young Frankenstein, Paper Moon, et cetera, et cetera. Why did you settle on black and white? And I think,
well, from that first conversation I had with Perry when I was in that blizzard, he said, I want to do a movie in black and white. I said, okay, why? He tells me, and I go, okay. And then I went out to his ranch, and it was in the spring, and it was like, and I know the script, there's a drought, and it's like, it's green, it's beautiful. We can't shoot this in color. And he said, yeah, we're not shooting this in color. And one of the reasons he said that his favorite movie was HUD, and it was whole new, and that was black and white. And he said that's kind of my favorite movie. And so we talked about the black and white, but I started doing some experimentation with filters. Now, what we did, we watched a lot of movies, 2,000 miles apart. When I watch a movie, he'd watch that movie, we talk about it. And what we finally came up with, and this is what I told my gaffer before he arrived, I said, I want you to watch 3 movies, HUD, Paper Moon, and Ida. Ida is the Polish film. We would call it Ida, but it's Ida in Polish language. And I said, the look I want is somewhere between those 3 films. They're all black and white, but they're all good for one thing or another. And I said and I researched the kind of filters they use for Paper Moon. And that was shot with a light red filter, I think a 23A, I think it was called. And so I experimented with black and white. But here's what we did. We shot in color with the intention of never using it in color. And what I researched was that if you shoot in black and white, you basically have, and it's not quite right, but it's basically what you have is exposure in contrast. If you shoot in color and make it black and white, you've got the different color channels that you can manipulate. And then I researched, well, if we're shooting it in color, I obviously can't shoot it with a red 23A filter or yellow filter, or orange filter, or whatever, to draw out the sky. I wanted that look in the sky. And well, if you're going to do color, you can't do that. So I researched it some more. And I found, and I don't reveal this, I found that there's you can do so much manipulation digitally these days, but there's one filter effect that, as far as I can tell, you cannot do digitally. And that's the filter I went with. And I don't reveal what that is.
To be left a secret.
That's it. But if you see it and if you look at it long enough, you will see the look. And I don't know if we're going to end up showing some stills here. We can go through them and talk about them a little bit. But yeah, I was really going for that look. As a matter of fact, in the beginning, we were calling it Petite Noir, just a little bit noir. But then I found out there's a rap singer that's named Petite Noir. That
I thought it sounded familiar.
Yeah, we want to call it Petite Noir. So then I came up with the idea of calling it Ranch Noir.
I like that.
That's what I call it. It doesn't mean anything, but that was my look that I was going for.
Well, it certainly added to the starkness.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're dealing with a story that revolves around a drought. And I think the other thing that Perry mentioned is that was there any discussion about marketability of the film
Yes.
and
Okay.
and
I got
keeping the
sidetracked.
color, keeping the
I
color
kept,
originals in
yeah.
case, say, foreign countries wouldn't accept it that way, that kind of thing?
Right, right. I got sidetracked on that. I was going to say that, yeah, we shot it in color because we thought it kind of fail safe because here we shoot it in color with the intention of making it black and white. Then we could, if they go back, if somebody says, "Well, we love your movie, but it's got to be color," we'd say, "Aha, we can take care of that."
Right.
But what we did, and I shot this to an outboard device, which was the monitor and the recorder all built into one. And I would look at it, I would light it for black and white with the black and white function of the monitor on. Then I would have to turn it back to color before I recorded, because if you don't do that, you're recording in black and white. So we had to record in color, but I could light it to black and white. And before I forget, let me tell you one thing I think really gave me an advantage. So when the when I started out in cinematography, you're looking through a viewfinder, you're shooting film, you're looking through a glass viewfinder, you're seeing color. When I started doing videography in the 80s sometime, for the next 20 years, we're shooting with like a professional, Betacam camera, like the networks use. And your viewfinder is black and white. You're shooting color, but you're looking at everything in black and white. And most people would set it up and go by what they call the waveform monitors or the peaking or whatever it is. All I would do is I would set up the monitor to color bars, and which is in black and white. Color bars, you get the tones right, get them matched whatever they're supposed to be. And then I would shoot everything that way and just visually set the exposure by what I saw, not by anything technical. But I was looking at everything for 20 years in black and white, and that gave me an appreciation of black and white that I don't think people, if they haven't done that, they would have the same appreciation. So I think that helped me a lot on this movie and made me like black and white even more than I might have. But we have long discussions about that. And that's always the thing that comes up on this movie is why black and white. And my stock answer is, this isn't just a black and white film, it's a black and white story. Distinction there, that it's to tell the story right. I agree with Perry on this totally. To tell the story right, it's got to be black and white. And I use the example, Schindler's List, one of my favorite movies. I cannot imagine Schindler's List in color. I just can't. I think it just wouldn't work. I mean, I disagree with a lot of people. The shot with the little girl in the red coat, to me, that's not so good. I don't like that. I understand why he did it, everything else, but it draws your attention. All of a sudden you go, oh, it's black and white, because here's color. And the other thing I was thinking about, there's a scene in The Divide where Perry's having his daughter's serving him coffee, and he's having one of his Alzheimer's moments, and he says, "Oh, have you seen what I did with that blue-handled spoon?" And it's in his pocket. And at the time we shot it, it made total sense. You read it on the paper, you're there, you see it. Oh, where's his blue-handled spoon? You're seeing it in color. Then the first thing I did when I was editing it, it goes to black and white, I said, "Oh, note to self, do not make a color reference in a black and white film." Because all of a sudden you go, "Oh, blue. What's blue? Nothing's blue. It's a mid-tone gray." So, and some people
But it did add to the realism of the story, because he would have referred to something by color, obviously.
But he could have said, "Where's that plastic handle spoon of mine?"
True.
Just as well. And because what you're doing is you're taking people out of the what I call the moment of disbelief, what it is, where it suddenly jars you into, oh yes, I'm watching a movie, or oh yes, the red coat in Schindler's List is like all of a sudden you're aware that you're watching a black and white movie because now he's introduced a color. And I understand why he did it in the way it was used, but it still to me was jarring, and it still is one of the greatest films ever done. Hard to watch, but
which is the same thing Kenneth Branagh did in Belfast when he released it this year.
Belfast, yeah, same thing. And I've been to Belfast and visited a lot of these places from the Troubles, and yeah, it's a black and white kind of city. It really is. Sorry to say, but it is. It just looks the part in black and white. And the thing about black and white, you appreciate the composition more, you appreciate the framing more, you appreciate the shapes. And the thing that I like to do in this movie was establish planes within the frame. There's one shot in there, I'm fine now, but where I have Luke is making a phone call, and Perry had an episode, and he had to put him in bed because he's not feeling well, and it's nighttime. And he goes out of the room. There's a room in between. And he gets on the phone. He comes around the corner to see how he's doing. And here's just a little bit of light on Perry in the bedroom, a darkened room in between, and just a little bit of light on Luke as he's talking on the phone. And he comes into frame, and that space there, I think you appreciate more in black and white because there's less to distract your mind from what you're seeing.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It's frame 17. You've got the plane of the actor plane. You've got and then two walls, and then you have Perry. And it naturally draws your eyes right to that tiny bit of light in the room where Perry's character is lying. Yeah.
So I tried, every time I could try to do something like that, I attempted to do that, and I just believe in, it's motion pictures, but if things are moving in the frame doesn't have to move too. It can, but it doesn't have to.
Well, that's an example
how you approach it.
That's an example of actually one of the what's an example of leads us right into our next question, and that is shooting at night. A lot of the scenes took place at night. Mm-hmm. Speaking of black and white, you only have so much light to use. That had to have been challenging for you. What are some of the specific challenges of shooting a black and white film in a night scene like that, and how did you overcome those? Some creative lighting, things like that?
Well, what we did, because it was extremely dry, there was a drought, we decided early on that we had to be very aware of the fire danger, so we didn't have a generator. LED lighting was fairly new on the market at the time. Color rendition wasn't perfect, but it was close enough since we were kind of doing color as a backup. And we tried to do battery operated lights as much as possible. Although luckily most of the ranch buildings were all within, I don't know, farthest run is maybe 100 yards. So from the electrical box, the pole where they had to tie in to the barn was maybe 100 yards. So when they're running their 4-aught cable or whatever it is out there, they had something. But yeah, we were very aware of the fire danger, and we tried to use minimalist lighting, and I tend to be a minimalist anyway. So, and I liked using practical lighting as much as possible.
Now, could you explain practical lighting? I mean, I understand what natural light is. Practical light is things that would exist already. Like we see an electrical pole with kind of some kind of a lamp on top there. Yeah.
Right. So what I did after doing the pre-scout is the barn had no lights on it. There was one barnyard light by the gate. It was one of these ugly mercury vapor things.
Mercury vapor, yeah.
For the time period of the movie. So we hired an electrician to come in, and I put lights over the two doors of the barn, and then one incandescent light by the gate. So it would set up pools of light. And for those of you
can move in and out of those pools, yeah.
For those of you old enough to remember the Jimmy Durante show, at the end he would walk off through pools of light after he said, "Good night, Mrs. Calabash," wherever you are. But you got to be pretty old to understand that one. But that, I call it the Mrs. Calabash lighting, so it's the Jimmy Durante lighting. So he would go through pools of light. So yeah, I put all those lights up there. And the important thing is that the main door is where Perry walks in. He's having this recurring nightmare, and he basically sleepwalks into his nightmare every night. And he would walk in through the darkness out of the pool of the yard light into the darkness, into the pool of the door light. And then the other light was just for definition. And then you have to do a little bit of nighttime movie magic to be able to see the trees just a little bit, and maybe some of the other fence posts. But you want to keep it real. And then
almost in the same way that he moved in and out of that consciousness, or his episodes throughout the film.
Exactly. And then for the editing, when you put up frame 8, that's at the where the ranch hand was living, in the shed where he was living, and that's lit just with one of those lights. It just comes down. So when she comes up into the door, she goes into the pool of light. He opens the door. It's dark behind him, but he opens the door and he comes into the pool of light. So you keep that totally natural. It should be lighting should be justified, in my opinion. So the only thing that we did, if you look at that shot where he's at the door, she's asking him to come out and find Sam, we did just a hint of light on the one frame edge and the other frame edge, just so it doesn't go off into total darkness, but it's just barely there. I call it just a kiss of light that's just there on something, a shovel, a handle of a shovel, whatever it is. And so that's the way that worked. The other one, so when you edit this in, put in frame 2, and that's the barn that you're seeing now. We called it the COD, which stood for, spoiler alert, the Cathedral of Death. So anytime it said on the script COD, that was the barn at night. And
the barn's its own character, really.
It is. It really is. It's a typical. It's in travel around the country. Barns in different areas of the country look different. That's a Western horse barn. Typically, it has that peak at the top. And if you're looking at frame number 2 now, you'll see that Perry from behind. He walks into that frame, and he had to hit that mark perfectly because his hat, which was a characteristic hat, and that peak he can't touch it. I said, that's what I'm going for. You come into that frame, you land, that peak is right there. And then you hesitate. And then you walk toward that door. It's just almost like he's in a trance, but he had to hit that mark just right. And that was a shot, that was a pre-visualization shot that both the writer and I had talked about. And I said, I know exactly how I want this shot to be. This is back when we were back home before we shot the movie. And the night that we did that, we were both about to tear up. I said, this is exactly what I had in mind. This is what I saw, what I pre-visualized. So it was, that one worked very well.
It's framed very well. I mean, it's the peak of the barn of the hat. The one thing I wanted to mention on the image 8 is that the view, what the viewer thinks is that the light that's hanging above that doorway is the light that's providing the luminescence to the scene, that there's no external lighting or anything like that. And I think it's beautiful that you can be in that suspension of disbelief that that there's no other lighting that's feeding into that frame.
Right. That was it. So as much as possible, I did that. And so like I said, the lighting on that is strictly that light that's above the door, and then just a real hint of light at the outer corners so it doesn't fall off into absolute darkness. So it's just a sense of space that you have there. So that was the kind of stuff that I was going for as I did this. I kept it very simple. We were a very low budget film. We didn't have a big crew. We had to keep it simple. But to me, everything was critical. Another one I'd like to talk about is frame 4, the jukebox. So we got somebody to donate an old 50-year-old jukebox for the shot that we were doing. And when they first plug it in, they couldn't make where the music selections are written out, they couldn't make it light up. Barry was saying, well, what's going on? We gotta get shooting. I said, no, Barry, we've got to get the light working. He says, well, just hit it with a light. I said, no, it won't look the same. You've got to have the light coming out of the jukebox. That's the way they look. And that's what's justifying that light. Now it's artificial, but that's what's justifying that little bit of light that's hitting Levi's face. Here's the jukebox, and that light is just lighting up the words on the thing. And that justifies the light that's on his face. And there's a practical behind him, which was a Budweiser pool table light that we had to disguise it enough so that we didn't have a problem with Budweiser. But that's what we did. And one other, while I'm looking at this, there's a frame 6 where Perry wakes up from his nightmare, comes up out of bed, absolutely, and screams. And that is lit with one light, strictly one light. And it's the porch light that I had installed right above the door. I also had to have, when we got to this house, someone had put solid doors, looking like somebody had buy at Home Depot today on the house. And in one of the sheds, we found the old original doors with the glass windows in the door. And we had our carpenter mount them on there because I had to tell people, no, I want the light to come through the glass. And that's what defines things. So when we did the bedroom scenes where he's having his nightmares or getting up in the middle of the night, it's strictly lit from the light that comes from the porch lights, the one that comes in the door glass, and the other one that comes in the window with the curtains kind of flopping in slight breeze. So back to practical lights. Any practical light is anything, a table lamp, anything that's a natural light that wouldn't, not necessarily a movie, that's just at your home or at a business, out on the street lights, car lights, anything like that. That's practical light. So you want to use that and enhance that just enough that it looks absolutely realistic, which that's what the look that I was going for. So hopefully get that. So let us see.
Well, one of my most favorite scenes in the film you shared in preparation for the show today was also one of the most difficult. Now you see shadows used in film, you see occasionally silhouettes, and this is a silhouette shot. Can you explain? And of course, we'll bring up the I think it's the last couple of frames we have here in the 30s, late 30s. Why that was so difficult, and what you ended up doing to make that successful?
So when I first got out to California to do the pre-pro on this, we met Perry at dinner that night, and we were talking about that shot. And I had visualized it that he wanted it out on the land, away from the buildings, and he wanted it to be a night shot. And I said, okay, well, we don't have a generator, we can't run, wouldn't have enough battery power, we can't run cable all the way out there. I said, oh, how about we do this? So when she pulls up in her truck, the dust is stirred up, shining through that, and she leaves the truck on with the lights, and that defines them. And for whatever Perry said, no, don't want that. Okay, now how am I going to have a reason to have light out there to light their faces at all? And then I decided, well, don't fight it. We're not lighting anything.
Let's go with it.
So as we drove across the land, just before it got dark that night, I stopped the car. I got out, went back. I said, this is it. This is that shot. You see this hillside? You see that lone tree right there? I'm going to frame this up with that lone tree. They're on this little shelf road, and they're going to be there just so their upper bodies are in the silhouette, and that's what worked. And then Sarah did this really good accidental thing. She'd had her cowboy hat with her all the time, and then she did the thing where the string is here and it goes to her back. So when she's there in profile, it defines her. And that was just a lucky accident. Maybe she intended to, or maybe it was just an accident, but we didn't know she was going to do it. And it was like, it's perfect because you've been seeing these two through the whole movie. You've seen their faces, their voices. So when they get out here and it's dark and they're in silhouette, and it's a 6.5 minute scene. And it's one of the strongest scenes in the movie because that silhouette, it's almost counterintuitive. It draws you into it more because of what it is. But that was the one it's one of the few times we did a multiple camera on the shoot. I did everything else. I only wanted to do single camera. And we had a second, we actually had a third camera, we never used it for that shot. And there's the one time I actually got mad at the crew because we got set up and we're waiting for the light, It's just about right. And I'm looking at the other cameras and I'm saying, don't open it up. What are you doing? He said, well, if I open up, you can see their faces better. I said, I don't want to see their faces. It's a silhouette. We wait a little bit and I look over and said, don't open it up. Well, yeah, but I want to see it. I said, no, I don't want to see their faces. I want it to be a silhouette. And then I got a little mad at everybody and I said, God damn it, it's a silhouette. It's a silhouette. Do you not understand what that means? I said, and if it's wrong, it'll be me, not you. And I said to Perry that first night when we went out when I first got there for pre-pro, I went out of there and I looked at that and I told him what I was going to do. And he says, do you think it'll work? And I said, well, it'll either be the smartest thing I did in this film or the dumbest thing. and we went with it. And I've done this before when I've been at festival things and viewings in large audiences. I will say, without begging the question, I will say, what scene stands out the most to you? And almost always they'll say the silhouette scene.
Mm-hmm.
And it just worked. And it's, I don't know, it just came to me that would work. And I thought, no, I don't have much other choice. We're going to do it as a silhouette because we had a limited, we did end up doing 3 takes all the way through the 6.5 minutes. And so you're talking almost 20 minutes there. So it's like, I was starting just before the light I wanted. It was just too dark on the end of the last one. So the middle one was perfect. And thank God they got their lines. These actors were wonderful. Almost never did anybody blow a line. They were perfect. And all 3 of them, they never missed a line, a pause, nothing. And so that middle one in its entirety, just like it was. And then we had that second camera, which was a little bit tighter. And I cut in just a couple times just because I thought it needed a little bit of variety, but not too much.
Now you mentioned the framing the instructions you gave to Perry in that one scene that we showed. Now, did you give any other special instructions to the cast? Does anything change for them as actors when you're shooting in black and white versus color?
No, I don't think so. No, because what they're seeing, their reality is they're looking at, just like I'm looking at you in color. To them, it's nothing different. And no, I don't. It's an interesting question, but I don't think it would affect them at all. No, I don't think so.
Did you have any instances on the shoot when you're looking for something with perfect lighting that happens once a day, like the scene we just talked about, and then something happens that it goes away, or it didn't happen as you expected, and then you had to wait another day or a few days to shoot it again?
Well, frame 24. It's where Perry walks across the forecourt toward this wooden gate, and the ranch hand's shed is off in the distance. He has just had an argument with his daughter. His daughter has just read him the riot act, and he's very embarrassed, and it's an Alzheimer's moment, and he's walking back across the courtyard. We got set up for that shot. Just as we're ready to shoot, the wind comes up, and then a little dust cover goes through. And I'm saying, rolling now, get position, first positions, go. And we got like 2 takes of it, and it was perfect because it fit the mood, because she had just yelled at him and he's embarrassed, and he's, if you ever know anybody with Alzheimer's, which that would be like, they don't know how to react. And he's walking back across this, and just as that happens, Luke comes out of his shed and he sees him, and he's just pitying him for what's going on. And it was this perfect shot. And it's on the cutting room floor. You'd never made it in the movie. But it was perfect. It was just like, I thought, oh my God, we got this perfect, just the chance of having this little wind burst come in and stir up all the dust and just made it fit, and it was just perfect. And it
got to be fast to catch those dust devils. That frame 24 actually reminds me of something that I really enjoyed. I dabble in photography and have started studying black and white photography a bit, actually just in recent months. And there's definitely an emphasis on looking for texture and patterning, because you don't have color to rely on to tell the story. And there was so many opportunities to capture texture and fencing, fence posts, barbed wire, and just even the way that it was shot in 4K, even just the textures on the trees, the leaves in those beautiful panoramic shots you made. Obviously, much of that must have been on purpose, but I think it just lends itself to how well a Western in this kind of setting works in black and white.
It does. It's really enhanced my appreciation of black and white. And, I was very happy to see that Mank, was that 2 years ago, won cinematography for Mank. And,
Yep.
And there's been some others that have been quite good. Well, Lighthouse, I remember Lighthouse, kind of a strange movie to me, but it was
Stark, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and this was the thing that when we did our premiere in LA, and the reviewer for the LA Times wrote the review, I think he thought he was knocking it. He referred to my photography as stark, and I read it and I said, nailed it.
There you go. Yeah.
That was what we were going for. And but then 2 months later, he writes a year-end review of movies that you should see. And he says something like, black and white should be appreciated more, something like that. And if you see these movies, 1, 2, and The Divide, it'll give you appreciation of what a great black and white movie can do. And I thought you didn't like it 2 months ago. And now you like it. Whatever. But when he said stark, I thought, I'll take that as a compliment. That's what I was going for.
That's the first word that comes to mind for me. And and we'll go ahead and pop a few of these frames in throughout the whole conversation so people can get an idea of what we're looking at. You provided us with some great ones, but the old adage of show don't tell. I mean, you can feel the heat. You can feel the burden of this drought that these folks are under. And they do reference it, but the entire thing, even the night shots, I don't know if we've all been, I've spent time in the Midwest, and that it doesn't cool off necessarily. And just that is just that overwhelming, almost pressure that heat brings. And it's very, I don't know, it's just present throughout the whole film.
Yeah, it was the real deal. We had some extremely hot days, and
lucky but unlucky at the same time.
Yeah.
Really going full method for those actors, right?
Right. But yeah, the other thing to me that I'd like to give this appreciation to people who do this kind of work, no matter how good a cinematographer on whatever level might be, if he doesn't have good things to shoot, I don't care how good you are. So all of the people, from the actors, the sets, the costuming, the props, and all those things, absolutely critical. And to me, I got so detaily on these things. And once again, this was such a small movie that I convinced Perry to hire my wife as the set decorator. And it worked out quite well, because when the art director showed up late, he lasted about a day and didn't last much longer than that. So then she became the kind of the de facto art director. And we spent a lot of that 4 weeks of pre-pro going through flea markets and antique shops, trying to find all of these props that we could put in. And if you've seen the movie, there's the scene where there's this old fan, and it's blowing the curtains, and it took so long to find a fan that looked like that worked. And I still had to rewire it, because it was like, I looked at it, we're going to get electrocuted. So I had to rewire it at Perry's house one night. And but yeah, it worked. And it's like an oscillating fan, these old fans. And this thing, it looked like an accident ready to happen, because now you can barely stick your finger into a fan. And this was like big open spaces in it. But it was interesting trying to find stuff. This was set in 1976. So it's a period film, yes, but it's not that long ago. But it's still hard to find a lot of this stuff. And then one thing we had to find for the one desk shot, we needed a 1976 calendar. We could not find one. We put out stuff on Facebook. Anybody have a 1976 calendar? Any condition, doesn't matter. And then finally, this house up in the attic is like a treasure trove of antiques as well. And the one room that we didn't use, which we used to stage things in, one day my wife went to move a dresser out of the way to get something. And on the wall behind this high dresser was a 1976 calendar.
Unbelievable.
I said, oh, okay, we got it. So that's what we put in the shot. But all of those little detailing things is just like a scene 3, the ranch house. That sign that says, was a California farmer, that is like one of those notice do not trespass signs. I found that in the attic of the house. And I said, well, that's got to be on here. This is an important thing. So I get involved in it as far as just all the visuals and even the props. And for the movie like this and a small crew, then I could do that, which was one of the beauties of working on a movie like this, which was such a small movie.
Well, all the more important, like you said, when you don't have color to tell that story, you do notice so many of those details, even more so. The accuracy of the license plates. Vehicles play a large role in the film, and the accuracy of the license plates, the tags on them are the right year, that type of thing.
We did when Sarah arrives in her pickup truck from Washington. We had a Washington State plate made for the right year for that truck. Oh, if only for the front. Well, only because we'd see either the front or the back at one time, so it was the same plate, just moved around a little bit. But there's another thing too. If you have the chance, if you drop in frame 21 and frame 22, this was strictly luck, because our shooting day got drawn out, and it's where Sarah arrives at the ranch, and Perry doesn't know the Sam character doesn't know she's there. He comes up, he's wearing his hat, and he comes up and says, Sarah, like, what are you doing here? And then he talks to her a little bit, and then he warms up. He takes off his hat, and he says, well, what do you want for dinner? And when he does that, the light comes through his white gray hair and just lights him up like a halo. It's like,
like a halo, yeah.
I thought, if we'd shot this when we were scheduled to, I'd have missed that. But it was late in the day and the sun was low, and it just came in. He's wearing this characteristic hat, and he takes it off and just lights him up. and it was like strictly an accident.
That reminded me of a shot in the movie The Natural, the Robert Redford film. Glenn Close stands up, and the light is coming from behind her and just lights her up, almost makes her look like an angel in that the way it does it. The exact same thing with this shot. When you see that light come behind through the hair, it's
the ultimate practical light, right?
Yeah, and it's like I said, it was strictly an accident, but I said I'll go with it. I'll take it. But you know what? All throughout a movie like this, or any movie that you're working on, it's those details that make it work. Because a lot of people notice all these little things. Is this right? Is this right? Is this wrong? Yeah, I was watching a movie last night. It was about a guy and his daughter. They're driving across country from California to Florida, and it comes up and it says, Texas, Eastern Texas. There are no mountains in Eastern Texas. I'm sorry. It's like, and then they go to New Orleans, and then they're driving across Gulf Coast states, going to Florida, and thinking, okay, you shot this where? Just within an hour of the studio?
In Burbank. Yeah.
Like, I don't know. But those things just ruin a movie. The one that was a classic to me was, you remember the movie 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri?
Yep.
They shot it in North Carolina. And granted that, southern Missouri and western North Carolina look kind of the same. Enough one could pass for the other, but why not? Since it didn't really matter, why didn't they call it 3 Billboards Outside of Ebbing, North Carolina? Why would they say it's something that it isn't when it clearly wasn't? It was like, I don't know. It's just little things like that bother me in movies.
The blessing and curse of the movie lover and the cinephile, right? Noticing all those little things and still trying to enjoy it.
You get to notice those little details.
All the films that are shot in the United States, but or set in the United States, but then you see Scotiabank or one of those Canadian banks in the background or something like that, and you think,
Well, I mean, I'm working on it with Janet Brown, the writer for The Divide. I'm working with her on another project, and it happened in Colorado in the 1930s, and I'm going to shoot in Colorado if we get to do it, because a lot of the locations, the buildings, the houses, a lot of them are still there from the true. It's a kind of true crime story, and a lot of these places are still there. I don't know if you ever saw this, the movie In Cold Blood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The interiors at the house where the guys kill the family, that was shot in the actual house.
Oh, is that right?
The family was killed.
Wow.
It's just chilling. It's like,
yeah,
very creepy to do that. But it was only 2 or 3, 4 years after the actual event. And, somebody else owned the house by then, and I guess money talks, and they got to do it. I don't know, circumstance. But I thought, it's realism, but it's almost a little bit too much. But anyway, that's what I'm looking at. It's like, I could probably easily shoot this thing in New Mexico and get better tax credits, but Colorado's the location, so Colorado's where it should be.
Yeah, it's all about the telling of the story and telling it accurately, especially like you said, if it's something based on true events.
Yeah, that's true. So
well, that actually you just answer our next question, which is what you're working on next. This hour has just flown by, but got a project you're shooting in Colorado. Anything else in the hopper?
That's the one I'm working on right now, and it started out to be a feature film, and then we decided there's so much story here, it needs to be a limited series, like a 6-part or 8-part or something like that. And I think anyway, because of what's happened in the last 2 years, that unfortunately the future is more streaming than it is theaters. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's probably where it should be aimed, at least at this point.
For better or worse, but we are seeing a lot of really great content. There's directed that way.
Mm-hmm. I'm finding I'm watching a lot of, especially British and European series, especially if I can see something, hear it in the native language and read the subtitles. I've actually gotten good at reading subtitles and keeping my eyes flying around, but it takes a little work. At first you don't want to do it, but then it works.
Yeah, we found a lot of good Scandinavian shows that we do the exact same thing with. They're Norwegian or Swedish, and we're doing the subtitles, and
Well, the Nordic noirs. First one I watched like that was the Valhalla Murders done in Iceland. And if you've ever been to Iceland and you hear the language, it's very interesting sounding language.
It is.
Well, Russ, thank you again so much
Yeah,
for joining
thank
us. We've had this one on the books for a while. Been looking forward to it. Again, Russ Rayburn, Winding Road Films HD. If folks are interested in getting more information about you and the work you're doing, is there a website, social media, anything like that?
Not right now. There will
Okay.
be soon. There'll be a new one soon. I can let you guys know. But
Yeah,
yeah, I'll be
please do.
specific to that project. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, great. And like I said, we're going to be dropping a few of these frames that you provided with us throughout the show so people can get a good feel for the movie. It's an excellent film. I rewatched it last night. And just, again, visually just beautiful. And everybody should go out and check it out. I know you can rent it on Amazon right now. And if you can see it in 4K, by all means, see it in 4K. Russ Rayburn, thanks again so much for your time. I hope you cross paths again soon.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me on the show.
Thanks, Russ.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.